now between 7:30, actually 7:40 and 8, we're going to be open for questions. So if you have any question related to your crop, just stay on and we're going to make sure to answer those. Speaking on that, Phil, I do have my first question already here. And that probably is going to be for you. The question is related to alfalfa stands. How do these frost events affect newly planted alfalfa? Probably quarter to half-inch tall.
Well, I think you're going to find, Ricardo, that it's very similar to what Dennis talked about. All the literature that I've seen points to the fact that these newly emerged alfalfa plants are very tough early on, and especially in the unifoliate stage, until they probably get to the third trifoliate, they're going to be fairly resistant to frost damage. And so I think, again, it's too early to tell. In 2 or 3 days, once we have these warmer temperatures, as you go out and look at the alfalfa plants that are established, you'll find that if there's black or discoloration or a browning of those leaves, then that'll tell you what's going to happen. But I'm expecting that we're probably going to have pretty good tolerance to the cold temperatures that we had. But again, scouting is always the best thing to do. And if you have the opportunity, if you do see that you have a fair amount of damage to that stand, no-till directly right into that stand and add some more seed to it, and I think you'll be just fine.
Thank you very much, Phil. I don't know if Mike or Manny, they are available here, they're around. Do you guys have anything to talk about soybean and corn?
Ricardo, this is Christy. I wrote a quick comment in there. Just as Dennis was talking about replanting, if herbicides have been applied, there are some rotation restrictions that need to be considered. So a lot of things like Husky, Osprey, PowerFlex, all of those have some rotation restrictions. And we did find an error in the weed guide. So if you're rotating to, like if you had to replant soybeans, there is a 3-month rotation restriction for Osprey. So just kind of keep that in mind, that you need to check out those herbicide rotation restrictions if a herbicide has been applied.
Chris, this is such a good point. Yes, and it's kind of easy to forget that. Definitely, you need to remember and go back to your label. That's a really good point. Thank you very much.
Ricardo, you had asked a question about soybeans and if there was any damage to soybeans this year. There were some very early planted soybeans in Michigan. A lot of interest in that this year. And visited a field yesterday that was planted up in Sparta. So temperatures got down to 25 degrees on Saturday night, as Jeff mentioned. And the beans were out of the ground. And I've got a couple pictures. I don't know if you can let me share my screen. So what this is showing is kind of what the stage the beans were at. And if you look at this picture over to the right where the cotyledons are all black and brown and discolored, that's really not looking good. But right next to that, you'll see some plants where the cotyledons were not affected. The new growth, the unifoliates, were dead in this plant over here and to the left. But the cotyledons, and I'm kind of optimistic for some of these. And let me show you a next picture here that'll show you. So this one is definitely toast. You got the black cotyledons. The other reason it's toast is if you look up here and look at the hypocotyl, this is all sunken. It's soft. It's a dead plant. It's not going to amount to anything. Very easy to see that. These are the ones that I'm optimistic about. And most of the plants in the field were in this stage. The cotyledons are still healthy. They have some limited damage around the edges, but you can see the unifoliate leaves were just fried right off. And I'm concerned that the main growing point is probably fried off in these plants. But we still have 2 more meristems on the stem to come back to life. At the base of each one of these cotyledons on either side of that hypocotyl, there is meristematic tissue which will produce new growth if it's not damaged. But you can clearly see how the unifoliates were much more sensitive to the cold temperature damage than the cotyledons. So I'm hoping, and that's what it looks like close up. From the side view, you can see that this tissue here is in good shape. The hypocotyl is in good shape. I am optimistic. Given a couple, 3 days, we go back out and look at the field. I'm really optimistic that we may get some new growth out of those cotyledon meristems. So that's my hope. So very similar message to what what you guys are saying. And this is just a link to what I think is probably the most practical guide to assessing soybean injury from frost damage. It's from Purdue, and they show some excellent pictures as well. But if the beans were not above the ground at the time that the cool temperatures occurred, I think you're safe. So that's kind of my input on it.
Mike, quick question here. Do you think there is a difference if I have a soil that was no-till or tilled soil? In which scenario that I'm going to have like a chance to have a higher problem? Do you have that information?
Based on experience, Ricardo, I would say I've only seen frost damage on emerged soybeans twice in 32 years. And where I've seen it has been in fields that were no-till, and it was the worst when the residue was concentrated around the plant. So the thicker the residue, the worse the frost damage. Now, I will say that was from the different type of freeze event, Ricardo. That was where we have the typical still air and the cold air settled down on the soil surface. In this event that we had on Saturday, I don't think it made any difference. It could have been clean tilled, it could have been no tilled, because we had that 6 to 8 mile an hour winds. We had 25-degree temperatures. I really don't think residue would have mattered. But in a typical frost event where it's a settling frost, more residue typically leads to more damage.
Well, and like you said, then just making sure. So if my soybean was not germinated by that time, I'm pretty much safe, and I can be confident that probably not going to have yield reduction, right? So that's the bottom line. So if I had no soybean emerged by that time, I would probably safe.
I believe that to be the truth, except for one caveat, and that would be for the folks that maybe planted on Friday, right before the event. There is a phenomenon called chilling injury, imbibitional chilling injury, that may have affected those plants. So that would be the only one, and it's really hard to assess that until the plants emerge. Really what you look for is you look for discolored cotyledons around the edges. If there's some browning on the cotyledons, they probably did experience some chilling injury. But you don't know the extent of the damage until you just sort of look for normal development, normal emergence on those fields.
Mike, and what would be triggering you to decide between replanting or not? So let's say you go back now at the end of the week or next week. So what's the fine line between you deciding what to do?
That's a really good question, and that's actually changed. Sean Conley from the University of Wisconsin has a really good publication, and he talks about, based on a couple of years of research, and he really talks about the fact that we very rarely would ever recommend tearing up a soybean stand completely and starting over from scratch. That's just old school. We just don't do that anymore. So the reason for that is because those early planted beans, even though they're thin, they have tremendous yield potential relative to the later planted beans. So his threshold was about 60,000. If you've got 60,000 viable plants in there, you could still go ahead and interplant if you wanted, but you didn't necessarily have to. Our data from 45 years, 48 trials, shows something very similar. About 60,000 plants per acre will yield just as well as 120 plants per acre. So I would encourage somebody, if somebody really wants to replant or interplant, give me a call, and I can help them, walk them through that decision.
Mike, and this is such a good point, because like we know, like corn, if you lose one plant, you lost part of your yield. But like you said, soybean, they have that plasticity that they can take the space of that one that's not there anymore. So so I think going there and do stand count is really important right now before doing anything, right? Like go there and do stand count and see your numbers.
Exactly. And what you're looking for, I don't know if I made this very clear, but on those, the ones that were up and you think you had some freeze damage potentially, what you're looking for is new growth, tiny little new green growth out of the plants. That's what you're looking for. It could be the main growing point. I'm really skeptical. I think it's going to come out of either side of the stem. If we have any at all, it's going to come out of those cotyledon nodes.
Mike, I do have two questions from people here. Let me read those out loud for you. So Craig said that he dug up some early plant soybean seed yesterday, and the first growth from the seed seemed to be heading down rather than up towards the surface. His question is that possible an on-off occurrence, or is the seed smart enough to seek warmer, lower temps?
I guess I'm not fully, I wish I could look at a picture. I'm not fully understanding because it's always the root that emerges first. So that is, normal. The root is what's going to emerge first from the seed. And of course, that's going to proceed down. I'd have to look at the seed to really answer Craig's question, to know. There have been instances, a couple years ago, we saw something that was really weird. The soybean plants actually leafed out underneath the soil surface, very similar to what you'll see with corn sometimes, where the coleoptile will break and they'll leaf out under the soil. We saw that with soybeans, and the soybeans actually did start growing down. It wasn't just the unifoliate leaves were starting to actually grow down. And the explanation for that at that time was that the seed was planted too deeply and it got cold. And we got into it hit a cold barrier and it started to grow down. But I've only seen that once in 30 years, and I think it's very rare. Manny, have you ever seen that situation where it starts to leaf out underneath the soil surface?
No, Mike, I have not. Again, I think it's a good point. As you mentioned, you first are going to see the root growth, right? So I think it'll be I'll be pretty curious to see that picture. So if Craig can send maybe Mike and I that picture, I think we'll be pretty interested to look at that and see what's going on.
Yeah, Craig. So if you can send a picture, it'd be amazing. And Mike, if you can also put the resource information, that link in the chat box, that would be really nice, so people, they can copy and paste that to their Google Chrome or whatever, so they can look up that information that you have on your last PowerPoint. It would be great. And I do have another question, and that's from Mark. He asked, did the dry soil conditions help to reduce the imbibition or chilling injury that we have heard about, but doesn't appear to be a significant issue this year? So he's asking if the dry soil conditions help to minimize the chilling injury that we heard about, but does not look that's real.
Seed can imbibe, seed is so dry, the soybean seed is so dry, 10, 12%, that it can imbibe moisture in the soil, visible moisture, even though it's not very high level content. It can still occur under moist soil conditions. Under dry soil conditions, I think it will slow. I don't know what Manny thinks, but I would think the imbibitional rate would be slowed down by a little bit drier soil conditions. So that could have helped. What you really don't want is a cold rain within 24 hours after planting. That's the worst case scenario. You don't want to plant into wet soils, and you don't want a cold rain within 24 hours. So if you can avoid those two things, and you have good seed quality, intact seed coats is one of the biggest things. You don't want any checked seed coats, growth cracks, wrinkled seed coats. If you don't have those conditions, soybean seed is pretty resistant to that imbibitional injury.
Yeah, Mike, I think you make a good point in terms of that good seed coat, right? If we are pushing for early soybean planting, seed quality is really important. And again, this year I think was a perfect example. Again, I think we need to wait here, and probably if folks did plant on Friday, as Mike was talking about, we probably want to go out and keep looking. It's hard to see that injury, right? I mean, sometimes you might think that it's just some other issues that might happen, right? Or sometimes you might even think about planter issues, but it's actually the imbibition injury that is happening. And with this dry soil, I think that's a pretty good point. Imbibition, as Mike said, doesn't need much moisture. So it will start to occur even when the soil is relatively dry. And it's pretty quick process, 12 to 24 hours in soybeans. In corn, it takes a little bit longer. It can go up to 24 to 48 hours. So in corn, if you were planting even on Thursday, you might need to be looking for that, right? Another caveat there might be with dry soils, those cooler air temperatures can travel into the ground, right? So they they have less buffering capacity because of less moisture that is present in there. So that might make things a little bit worse as well. So we need to probably think about that too.
So Manny, nice that you talk about. Do you have anything to share with us about corn regarding the freeze we had? Something that we need to watch for or worry about it?
Can I share my screen here?
Yes, you
I
can.
had a couple of pictures. I wish I could go out like Mike and scout fields, but I'm stuck here in my basement unless I have a approved research project to travel for, right? So I went to that guide that Mike was talking about. So let's see. I think it's some really nice pictures, and I was glad to see what Mike was reporting, and you can pretty much see some of those same damage symptoms on these pictures that that Purdue, Bob Nielsen put out there. You can see over here this some injury on the cotyledons, as well as this soft and shrunken hypocotyl, right? And if this injury occurs, then the chances of survival are pretty low compared to some of these other symptoms where that growing point might be dead, but you have those axillary nodes that you will get those two branches out of an injured plant, right? So some really good pictures here. And just like what Mike was saying over here, the growing point was frozen. So you will not see that main stem here, but hopefully again those auxiliary nodes are still intact, and you might be able to see some growth from those. Let's see, I did pull some corn pictures here. So this is again something out of Purdue, and I don't think we have corn that is this tall. This is a picture of VE to V1 corn. So with the one leaf that has a collar to it, right? You can see that with that first leaf over here. And you can see right after that frost event, again, that water soaken sort of symptoms on this plant, and it will start turning brown, yellow first, and then brown within 12 to 24 hours. But eventually it starts regrowing, because unlike soybeans, the corn growing point is below ground until it hits that 4 to 5 leaf stage. So that growing point is protected against that cold temperature, unless it again gets really cold and we are dealing with dry soils where the cold can travel into that upper soil profile and end up killing that growing point, right? So again, waiting, what Dennis was talking about earlier, patience is the key here. Just going back and looking, doing a stand count is going to be important. And unlike soybeans, corn, it's more important to have a uniform stand, right? Because it will not tiller out. So uniformity, not only the enough stand, but uniformity of that stand is going to be more important in corn compared to soybeans. And again, unless the damage is severe, which I don't think, because a lot of our corn is not above the ground at this point, I think we probably might be okay. Some other plants over. Yes.
Eddie, we have one more question that's come in for sugar beets, and I know that Daniel Bublitz is on.
Okay.
And I just wondered if there's been any problems with sugar beets.
Can I just wrap this up quickly, Phil? I just wanted to show this one last picture over here. I mean, this is a symptom where the cold has gone down to that growing point. So you can see over here, and this plant is toast. So this plant will not come back. So again, it's important to look at these injury symptoms and make an assessment.
Thank you, Manny.
All right, well, good morning, everyone. I'm Daniel Bublitz. I'm the sugar beet extension specialist. And so for sugar beets, the temperature at which we start to see damage is 28 degrees. So anything below that, we can start to see some issues with the beets. So the last couple of days, the freeze events that we've had, we were quite nervous actually about what would happen with that. But after scouting yesterday between myself and the Michigan sugar team, we actually found that for the most part, the beets appear to be in good shape from this last freeze. So we're actually quite optimistic that we're going to be okay from here on out. Although earlier in the spring, back towards the middle of April, we actually had a fairly significant freeze event then as well. we actually did see quite a bit of damage, and we had some replanting because of that, and then cresting issues. So actually, the company estimates that between 25 to 30,000 acres have been replanted so far. And by the time it's all said and done, we could have up to 30,000 acres replanted.
Thank you, Daniel. Do you have any pictures maybe you want to share or anything, or everything looks pretty good?
So the picture I have on the screen now is a typical healthy sugar beet. You can see that the cotyledons are nice and green, and you can even see the growing point there towards the middle. So on this screen, I have a picture of a sugar beet that was just slightly frost damaged. You can see the darkening kind of water-soaked color toward the tip of the cotyledons. Then on the next screen, I have one where that's dried up a little bit with that same sort of freeze damage. But with both of these, you can see that the important thing is that in the center here, where we have that growing point, that appears to be undamaged. So as long as that stays healthy, this beet will come through that little bit of damage that it does have and grow pretty much like normal. Then in this last picture, I have a beet that has severe freeze damage. You can see that both cotyledons are entirely turned black, as well as that growing point has sustained quite a bit of damage. And so with this sugar beet, we'd be quite nervous about it, and probably this one's not going to make it.
Daniel, thank you very much, sir. Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Oh, and we actually pretty much finished on time. It's 8:01, so we are done here. Thank you very much, you guys, that stayed until now. That was a really good number today, so thank you guys very much. And you guys are good to go. Thank you.
Hey guys, anybody has seen any damage on corn that was up in your area?
I haven't scouted yet. I want to go out today actually and scout some for soybean. So my goal is to record a video today. So maybe today or tomorrow, but I haven't seen anything yet.
When we were on that call on Monday, Manny, Bruce said that he had not seen any emerged corn as of Monday.
As of Sunday, I saw only one field in Clinton County that was emerged, and it was just barely out of the ground. But I have not been back to see what it looks like now.
I am just going to share a few screens here. These are some ones that Linden took yesterday. So, Phil, this is what alfalfa looks like down here. I've got a field right across from me. It looked fairly similar. Actually, it looked a little bit worse than that. He's got pictures of a newly seeded field as well. This is soybean. Lynn, feel free to jump in here. I think he said that these were planted maybe the first week of April. I have not seen any soybean that have emerged before that. I think some just started poking through on one field I visited, but these look a lot worse off than what I saw. And then this is corn. Lyndon, can you say anything about when this corn was planted?
There's still beans, right? Oh, okay.
Well, that corn looks different.
Yes.
Some of that corn's April 20 that's popped through. There's a couple thousand acres of stuff that looks like that down in the Brunson area. And I think there were some beans that looked in that slide set that everybody thinks they're going to come out of it. That's what we're hoping for anyway.
Was there any seed corn that was up? I was reading about those inbreds, and some of them are more susceptible to the cold temperature than the hybrids. I want to share this picture quickly. I found out yesterday, if the corn is still not up, and so instead of that, on top of the chilling injury, you can also get the cold injury where that the colupetile will like burst open, and you will get this leafing out symptoms below ground. So you can see like a healthy colupetile up top, and at the bottom you can see this leafing out symptoms. So that is something maybe if somebody did plant earlier that week to keep an eye on as well.
Actually, I just got one question to Jeff, since Jeff is still here, so let's ask him. Jeff, I don't know if you saw the chat box, but
was just trying to
there's an unfair question.
Yeah. No, I think the answer is soon. I think we will see response, especially. So over the next, I would say over the next couple of days, we'll definitely be above 50 again at 2 inches. I'm pretty confident about that, certainly by early next week.
Awesome. Thank you.